You are watching an OraCloud Plus Training as a Service video snippet. Snippets are concise, targeted tutorials explaining how to use, configure, integrate, deploy, and support Oracle's Fusion Cloud applications. Snippets are delivered via FAST, the Fusion Application Support Tool. FAST is accessible via the web at www.oracloud.plus. No more watching hours of Learning Path style videos to get to the 5-minute snippet you need. Learn Oracle's Fusion Cloud applications in minutes, not hours. Hello and welcome to the Fusion versus PeopleSoft Agreements comparison video. This video is intended for existing PeopleSoft Procurement Contract licensees looking for a comparison versus Fusion's agreement application, or what we also call a functional work area. Please note that Fusion is also referred to as Fusion Cloud Applications and or Oracle Cloud in the marketplace. Just note that they are one and the same. Okay, so this video highlights the differences between PeopleSoft's procurement contract functionality and Fusion's agreement functionality. Key comparison areas are as follows. First, requisition integration. Next, definitional items. Third, contracts integration. Fourth, contract spend rollup. And 5, what we'll call agreement controls. Okay, so requisition integration. All right, when you're in PeopleSoft, your ability to see procurement contract information within managed requisitions is limited. It's really focused on rec, order, receive, invoice, pay. And so one of the things you'll notice in Fusion is when you create requisitions and you link them to agreements, you see both the agreement number and the agreement line. That is assuming it's a blanket agreement, which is very similar to your procurement contract. For those of you that use procurement contracts in a more global sense, I think they were called open item contracts, so you didn't necessarily need lines. Those are called contract purchase agreements in Fusion. And so you have very similar functionality for both. And the nice thing is that you can see here, your requisition will tell you which agreement each line is linked to. 2, definitional items. This is huge. So if you recall, inside of PeopleSoft, every time I wanted to create an item, I needed to go into an actual definition of items, create purchasing item attributes, define the contracts, the sequence. It was heavy. And that functionality exists in Fusion. It's called a transactional item, but you don't need to use that unless you're going to use the item in inventory. What Fusion does is it allows you a different, lighter way to create this item and still have the visuality, which is what you see here. What we did is we created a BPA. On the BPA line, we defined the category, the name, the description. We have a supplier name, a site. There's a supplier item, which you can actually put links to the supplier item's URL in here, and that will work as well. And then you obviously, if you have an inventory, you can keep that. But a lot of these same search criteria or attributes that you would create an item with, you have on the line of a BPA. Also, you don't see it here, but you do see a picture. So you have both the thumbnail picture and the item picture that can be on the line of the BPA. So this is very nice, and it's a quick way to get items into self-service procurement, to be able to search for them with very minimal overhead. Last thing I will say, and this could have been its own area, is you can actually create the header of the agreement in Fusion and then use the supplier portal and allow the supplier to come in and manage the different lines. So for those of you that have really big agreements, this is a very nice labor savings. So just a little bit of the difference between Fusion and PeopleSoft in item creation and management. Next, contracts integration. So as you can see here, the agreement is actually created, or can be created, really I should say should be created as part of a contract. And what that really does nicely is it allows the rec to go either to the sourcing event and or the contract, but the contract links to the agreement, links to the orders. And so the ability to track contract spend is easy. The ability to see it, the ability to cut up spend within contracts at a line level it's very easy, very intuitive. So this is a nice way that they linked the contract and the agreement, and obviously the agreement links to the orders, or what it calls its releases. So next up, we kind of talked about this a little bit, but I'll reiterate it. Contract spend roll-up. So what you see here is a contract. And the contract links to the agreement as we talked about. But when you go to the purchasing activity page, and you have something similar in terms of activity on your procurement contract, this allows you to see that roll up. I don't have a released amount in this particular image, but similar to what you would see in PeopleSoft, it also allows you to click through and see that released amount. So you might ask, well, why put this in a comparison video if you're telling me procurement contract does it, an agreement does it? Well, what is really nice is this allows my paper document to link to my agreement. It allows me to set the notifications inside my contract that appear and help manage spend within my agreement. And it allows me to track all that activity straight back to the paper. So it's very easy for me to see spend on contract. And when I say easy, I think a fundamental difference that even when you're in Fusion for a while, you tend to minimize or forget. These things I'm showing you are out of the box. To be able to see the dollars, the activity, this is all out of the box against the paper, out of the box. And so it's just nice, it's a little bit easier. So that's a little bit of the difference of spend roll-up. And so then lastly, something we'll call controls. So there's some major controls for every agreement. And so in PeopleSoft, you're set ID driven. And so your suppliers or any of your record groups, your accounts departments, suppliers, really in essence contracts, they're driven by set ID. And it's a little bit monolithic. What's really nice here is I can have lines on agreements or agreements, and those agreements, I can control their business unit accessibility within the agreement. So I have a lot of flexibility at the agreement level, as opposed to saying this business unit always has to go here to get agreements. Which you also have as suppliers on what they call sites as well. So it's just a little bit more flexibility in Fusion than we used to have in Legacy Land. So next up, you can automatically have the recs linked to this agreement submitted for an approval. So I think much like what happens in PeopleSoft as well, the agreement, like the procurement contract, becomes the mechanism or one of the ways in which little approved recs become big POs. Now there's different ways you can turn it always on in terms of negotiated lines, or always off and run through buyer workbench, which is kind of like your sourcing workbench in PeopleSoft. Next, the ability to auto-generate the PO. Oh, sorry, I may have mixed these up. Automatically submit for approval and auto-generate the PO. They're two different controls that you can turn either on or off. And you have some additional flexibility. If this was a contract purchase agreement for punch out, I can delineate to say the items we have for punch out, we want those to auto-gen POs, but the other ones we do not. So a little bit more flexibility. The last thing I will mention is the last one here, retroactive pricing updates. This doesn't exist in PeopleSoft. So this is kind of a nice functionality where I can decide whether or not I want to enable retroactive pricing. So that's a little bit of the difference between PeopleSoft procurement contracts and Fusion agreements. Hopefully this was helpful. If you have any questions, email us at feedback@oracloud.plus. And as always, thank you for watching.